computer and we'll get started. So again, thank you all for having me here. I start off with just a little bit of background on me, not because I like talking about myself, but I think it's helpful to people to know how I came to online mediation, having an online practice. I have a fully online practice. I have not had an in-person office for over 2 years, long before COVID hit. But I came to it by necessity, like many of you are considering it now with COVID. But about 5 years ago, after 26 years of a pretty standard traditional family law mediation and litigation practice in Connecticut, I moved completely across the country. I moved from Connecticut to California, where I was not licensed to practice law. I didn't know anyone. No one knew me. And I went and I opened up a mediation office in California, and it was crickets, right? Nobody knew me. I had no clients. I didn't know California law yet, and I still had to take the bar there. So I quickly realized if I wanted to make a living, I needed to work with people in Connecticut, even though I was in California. So I started working with clients right away, doing mediations via initially a few other platforms. I think I tried WebEx and GoToMeeting, and I quickly settled on Zoom back about 5 years ago. And it took off immediately. My Connecticut clients were thrilled. I started being able to get clients across the state of Connecticut. Most of my clients when I lived there had been in Fairfield County, where my practice was for 26 years. And it just took off. I was quite surprised. I didn't really know anyone else who was doing it. And as it continued, and once I got licensed in California, I continued to offer services and mediation for California residents, but statewide online. And it continued to be very, very popular and a huge part of my revenue source. I actually did very few in-person mediations. So 2 years ago, when I moved to Chicago, which is where I now reside, I made that conscious choice not to even rent an office space or open a brick and mortar office. I decided to stay completely online and have not had an office space since then and have no intention of ever opening an office again at this point. The other thing that happened is about 2 years ago, while I was still in California, so many colleagues knew what I was doing with an online practice that they wanted to know how I was doing it. So I did start Learn to Mediate Online, which is my training company, and started the training program that I'm sort of giving you the highlights of today, back about 2.5 years ago. And it was, I had people signing up for it. People thought it was a novel and interesting idea. But then lo and behold, about 4 or 5 months ago, it became a pretty popular thing. And in the past 4 or 5 months, I think I've trained almost 16,000 mediators through one of my programs. So if you want to know anything about any of that, and I'll tell you, there's a ton of resources on the Learn to Mediate Online website. They're all free. I have free videos. I have podcast episodes that talk about a lot of the issues for online mediation. I urge you to go there. You can get downloads of a lot of the forms that I have. I give them away for free. I'm really very, very passionate about helping us all to get online and do this in a way. I know it makes us nervous, and I know it takes some training. So I'm very passionate about helping everybody in our profession do this and do it well. So one of the things I like to start out with, because some of it are the benefits of mediating online, because I know just like I came to it by necessity because of distance, I know many of you are coming to it because of the current quarantine situation. And it was not something that you considered perhaps before that. And because many people are feeling forced to consider online mediation, I feel there's a lot of resistance and there's a lot of fear. And I think it's natural, especially if you're of my age group or older. The tech fear is also a part of this. And so one of the things I just like to bring to all of our attention, as well as I think this is good for you to know for when you talk to your clients about mediating online, are all the many, many benefits that have now become very apparent to me. And they go beyond just being socially distant. I think convenience, the number one here, is pretty obvious. But the fact that you don't have to travel, that no one has to sit in traffic, they don't have to schedule that additional time into their schedule. It's just easier to schedule a multi-party mediation proceeding. if you have, 8 people who need to coordinate schedules, or 10 people, or whatever that might be. And really, people can be almost anywhere. In fact, I am right now working with 3 professionals who have all decided to take this opportunity of COVID and quarantine to relocate to places where they've wanted to live in their lives while they maintain practices in their original jurisdictions. So I have one lady I'm working with who's moved to San Francisco, yet still continues to mediate in New York. I have another who's moved to Arizona, still continues to mediate in Florida, and another gentleman who's doing the same thing. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility, something to think about. It also, as I sort of referenced earlier, it immediately expands your client base. And what I hadn't realized was that it also could expand your service offerings. So my client base, as I said earlier, right, I could work with clients all over the state of Connecticut, whereas before I had really been sort of county bound. And then when I became licensed in California and started doing mediations throughout California, it wasn't just San Diego where I could mediate. I was mediating all up and down the state, and that's a pretty big state. That really added to my client base very quickly when I was able to offer online services throughout the state. But the other thing that quickly became apparent to me was that people in other states or other jurisdictions also wanted to work with me, maybe not as their mediator, but I began doing coaching. I began to do a lot of expert consulting work where I would come in and help in high conflict cases or in other mediators' cases. And I started doing my training, and it's all online. And I now work with people very literally all around the world. I have clients pretty much everywhere, or it feels like it, because I work sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning. The downside is that sometimes your clients are in Australia and you're going to work at some odd hours, or in Japan. But it's wonderful to, for financial reasons, to be able to expand your base and your offerings. Another financial reason is the reduction of overhead. The other day I was looking through some old pictures and I saw my beautiful office from La Jolla, the one that I rented when I first moved to California that cost me an arm and a leg, but it was beautiful. I hardly ever went there. And, I was still writing checks on it, even though I moved 2 years ago because the lease wasn't up until just recently. Trust me, it's wonderful not to have to write that rent check anymore. The programs that I use to be an online mediator, to have a fully online practice, to run 3 businesses, the programs are less than $100 a month, my overhead. The one thing for your clients that is also very helpful to you is the number 4 here. It is a much more comfortable and supportive environment for your clients to be in a place of their own choosing to go through the mediation rather than some stranger's conference room. As a family mediator, I will tell you, most people are sitting on their couch with their dog. And these days, I think most people are in their homes because of COVID. But generally, even before COVID, my clients were almost always either at home or in their office, both places where they have some comfort level. And that helps them to regulate their emotions in a much easier, it's just easier for them. They don't get as heightened emotional content. They're able to work through the issues in the mediation more easily. There's something about not physically being in the same room together that actually can bring down the emotional level. And that has been very helpful for them. They also, there's also the obvious safer. And I know COVID is one of the safety issues. Being remote keeps us all safer. But for anyone who's dealing with high conflict matters, highly emotional matters, or I've even done some domestic violence cases where I am able to mediate those cases. Those people have access, the victims of domestic violence have access to mediation where I would never have done them in person. Now, it takes some extra precautions when you're doing that, but you can do those online. And then for our clients with disabilities, truly online mediation is a game changer for them. I've had clients who are paraplegics and quadriplegics. I've had deaf clients who the subtitles or the closed captioning is very helpful for them. There's really a large number of conveniences for people with disabilities built into an online platform. But there is, I'm not going to hide it or hide from it. There is a major difference between an online and an in-person mediation that really, I think, is at the foremost of everyone's mind. And that it boils down to the fact that your client's environment is out of your control. Unlike in an in-person mediation where they are in our conference rooms and we feel, and I'll put it this way and I'll explain why, where you have the illusion that you have control over their environment, that you feel that it's a safer, it's more private, it's more confidential, because the fact that they are now out of our control, or their environment is, that can lead to some issues of privacy and confidentiality. And I'm going to highlight those two issues in this presentation, but just at a high level, as an online mediator, as with a mediator in person, there is an illusion of control over our subjects. And I will tell you, we think that when they're in our conference room, they are not recording, they're not putting the information out to third parties. I will tell you now that since the advent of the cell phone into our lives, unless you are having people leave these out of the conference room and not allowing them to bring them in, they can record, they can open a phone line and allow third parties to be listening in. There's a myriad of, and they do. So if you want to scare yourselves, go ahead and Google that. But they obviously can also do that in an online proceeding. I think the difference is with an online proceeding, it's more obvious that they could be doing that. So what we need to do as online professionals is take as much control as we can over that. And I suggest doing it by creating guidelines and ground rules for your process, communicating those to the clients well in advance of the process, giving them an education on why they are so important to the integrity of their process, and making them mandatory. Put it in writing and make them sign it. And we'll cover those aspects of that. But it boils down to taking as much control. I would argue that you need to do the same thing in your in-person mediations. You actually have added, if I ever do an in-person mediation ever again, my agreement to mediate will say, no using your phone or any device for recording, no opening third-party phone lines, that type of information that's already in my online mediation agreement. So, but first I just want to touch on the setup and equipment, because this is something that people skip over as if, well, I'm just going to flip open my tablet, or I'm just going to log on my phone. And they don't really think about what we all need to actually participate as well, to make the process as smooth as possible. So a few things. I highly recommend using a laptop or desktop computer. Most of the programs work better, whether you're using Zoom, whether you're using WebEx, whether you're using some of the other programs that I'll talk about here for dispute resolution professionals. Almost all of those programs work better on a computer. They also usually will have a larger screen and will have integrated microphone and camera. It's very important to have a very good camera and a good microphone. Our communication is mostly through our facial expressions. I think it's 55%, they say, of our communication is through facial expressions. So you need a large enough screen where you're able to see the participants' faces, and the camera quality has to be good enough that you're catching that. I did a webinar the other day with one of my co-presenters who I think was using an older laptop, and the camera was such poor quality you really couldn't see his face, and it makes it hard for people to understand. So you want your participants to see your face, you need to let them know, because you need to see their face. We're mediators, we read the body language, we get the tells from people, as we call it, or the information from them that goes way beyond what they're saying. And in fact, what we say, the words we use, is only, I think, about 15% of our communication. The other major portion of our communication is in the inflection in our voice. And that goes to having a good microphone. Everybody needs to have good audio for a mediation process and for the communication to be clear. So if they don't have a good microphone in their desktop or laptop computer, they may have to get a USB plug-in, use the earbuds, do something that makes it clear enough so that everybody can hear them. And that is another point. The headphones, I almost always am wearing headphones when I'm doing a mediation. I actually like the over-the-ear ones for mediations because they're noise canceling to a better degree, and they're more comfortable. I don't love these things, but I don't have my over-the-ear ones with me. You do kind of look like Princess Leia. You have to get over that because it really allows you to hear better. If there's noise in your background or in the participant's background, it can make it very hard to hear. And again, this is information for everyone who's participating in the mediation, not just you, the mediator. This is information you should get across to your participants. And the one that's bolded up here, strong internet connection. If nothing else, probably the most important, what I'll call tech issue or tech component of an online proceeding is that every participant needs to have a strong internet connection. And that may take time. I had to be able to, not at my home office location right now, and I'm in a place that did not have good Wi-Fi. And I knew I was doing this webinar, so yesterday we had to make arrangements to have the Wi-Fi amplified so that I was going to be able to do this webinar. It took a little time to get that in place. You, the mediator, may have to do that, but all of your participants need to do it as well, because by far the most disruptive thing for a mediation process is when someone's audio keeps cutting out or the video keeps freezing. It's very disruptive to the process. The minute, if any of you are having a hard time seeing this webinar right now because that's happening, that is a clue to you that your Wi-Fi is probably not strong enough and you may need to amp it up. But your participants, all this information is important for your participants as well. One of the other things I always tell people is to be aware of your background. And this is becoming even more important as issues like Zoom fatigue are hitting the news. So Zoom fatigue is this phenomena that they're talking about, how we're so exhausted by the end of a day where we're just sitting at our desk, but going from Zoom conference to Zoom conference. And I can tell you as an online professional who's been online fully for years, even I lately have been surprised by how exhausted I feel at the end of a day. But there's actually, scientific evidence that shows that sitting here, being on screen all day long for meeting after meeting is very fatiguing. And another element that's fatiguing is when you are looking at multiple participants with a lot going on in their background. So the clearer and cleaner the backgrounds are for all of the participants, the better. So I've created, this one to throw up while I'm doing webinars. I have a very bland one that I use when I'm doing mediations. Zoom allows you, as many of you, I think it's become almost a contest for people to come up with crazy backgrounds or fun backgrounds, or just professional backgrounds, but it's definitely something to take into consideration. What you don't want to have is dirty laundry piles or dishes in the sink. I've seen all of them as I've been doing these webinars. And so, put a little thought into your background. It's actually helpful. It's also, if you have clients, say a domestic violence case, you may want to make sure your participants are in a place where they're using either a virtual background or have a very neutral background so that the other party can't figure out where they are. So it's also can be a safety issue. And then, you always want to have your camera straight ahead of you. You can see that it looks like I'm looking at you all. I'm actually looking at my picture on the screen because I have the thumbnail in the middle of the screen and my camera is right behind it. You also are going to want to have light on your face. So one of the worst mistakes that people seem to make with meetings is they have a window behind them, a nice bright sunny window, and they don't have any light coming in on their face. And what they end up looking like is deep throat during the Watergate hearings, right? Where the dark face answering questions with the modified voice. Not very helpful when your communication is 55% your facial expression. So again, everybody needs to have some lighting coming from usually either side of your computer screen towards your face. You also need to be aware that you're always going to be on screen. That can be disconcerting, and it's always going to be from your shoulders up. So everyone just needs to be used to that or get used to that. I find I don't even notice myself that much anymore as I'm doing mediations because you're so intent on looking at the different participants, but it can be disconcerting for people at first. Now, I talked about the different programs. I mainly use Zoom. I've been using it for the 5 years. And certainly, there's a reason why so many professionals have turned to Zoom. It works well for what we're trying to do, but it is not the only game in town. And for those who don't want to use it or have clients who won't use it or can't use it, many companies are not allowing their insurance adjusters, or law firms are not allowing their attorneys to use Zoom because of the security concerns. So, there's WebEx meetings, Skype for Business, GoToMeeting, those are all, and High Five. Those are all just broad platform online meeting. So it's really any kind of meeting. It could be a meeting of your book group. It could be a meeting of you and your cousins. It could be a arbitration. So it can be any type of a meeting. So that's where the security issues with any of them have come in, and they're not created really for online dispute resolution. So there are things you have to be sure you take care of in setting up your meetings to make sure they're secure. The ones you see on the lower part of the screen are platforms that were created by dispute resolution or attorney legal professionals for lawyers and online dispute resolution. So they were built from the ground up for what we do. So CREC, Legaler, RDO is Resolve Disputes Online, and Modron. Those are all they're not new to the block. They've been around between 7 and 10 years. All but CREC are from Australia, where they're way ahead of us on online dispute resolution and many different types of dispute resolution. And CREC is Colin Rule and Ethan Katz. So they are not the founders, but they had a lot to do with the input. So clearly, those are two of the biggest names in ODR out there. So those are something I think there's value in having more than one platform that you can offer to your clients. You don't want to lose a mediation because one of the attorneys' firms is not allowing them to use Zoom. So it is a very good idea to make sure that you have more than one platform that you offer. And again, these are all great. There are other platforms cropping up every day right now, right? Because of what's happening in our world. Everyone's rushing to become virtual meeting spaces. But there's also something to consider, because you're going to obviously use video conferencing to do what you did in an online or an in-person mediation. But there are other things that you do in an in-person mediation that you might be taking for granted. And then you get to the middle of your mediation or doing something in your online mediation and realize, oh my gosh, how are we going to exchange documents? How are we going to execute the agreement we're so happy we arrived at? How am I going to get paid? So some of these things are something to think about ahead of time. So these are some other programs that you may want to consider having ready to go. I think the key to success, or one of the first keys to success in mediating online, is for each practitioner to think ahead of time about what you do in your online or in your in-person mediations and figure out how you replicate that online. And there's almost always a way to do it. It's when you just flip open the computer, turn on the camera, and wing it, that's where the problems start to happen. Because without that forethought of saying, oh gosh, how are we going to sign these agreements? How are we, how is the client going to pay me? Because usually I got a check at the end of the session. Put some thought into them ahead of time. I personally, for exchanging and storage of documents, use Dropbox. I've been using it since in my law practice way back, I think for 20 years since they started, but there's OneDrive, Google Drive. There's a lot of people like to use Google Drive because Google Docs will allow you to have collaborative documents where everybody can be working on them if you're trying to draft an agreement at one time. But put some thought into that, because under confidentiality and privacy, we are not supposed to be attaching things to emails. We don't have control over what happens to those attachments once they go out. But when they're in a Dropbox or they're in a Google Drive, we have the ability to see what people are doing with those documents. So it's an added layer of confidentiality and privacy for our clients that we owe them as their professionals. You also very likely will need some way to execute documents. You hope so. You hope there's going to be a term sheet or an agreement at the end. You're going to have an agreement to mediate. I personally use DocuSign. I love it. I think it's absolutely, I use it for everything now these days. And I can tell you professionally, it's just up to my rate of getting things signed from clients. I send things out, but it's very easy to upload things to DocuSign. That sends it out in a secure platform to everyone. They all sign. It comes back to you, and then everyone gets a fully executed copy automatically. It's lovely. But there's also others. Many people are already signed up for the Adobe platforms, and Adobe Sign can be great. There's a number of different platforms out there. Someone just used one, I think it's Hello Sign, HELLO Sign. I was doing a mediation as counsel the other day, and the mediator was using that. It worked great as well. And then you want to think about how you're going to get paid. This is something that, since your clients are never going to be in your conference room, are they going to mail that check? That's perfectly fine, but you may want to make arrangements for that ahead of time. Or if you're going to be taking credit cards, how will that be handled? I personally, again, use PayPal. I've been using that for a very long time. Clients, most of them already have an account. They're not nervous about using it. It's very secure. I also use Square. I've had that one for a long time as well. And many law professionals I know use LawPay. You don't have to use one of these payment programs, but it makes life easy. And I will tell you, when it comes to tech and getting your clients online, the easier you make things for them, the happier they are with the online experience. So that's definitely a fine line that you walk as a mediator or professional. You want things to be secure. You want things to be done in the proper way, but you also want it to be as easy as possible, because the minute the people have to go and, look up different things, or it's hard for them, they've got to sit down and write out an old-fashioned check and put it in an envelope and put a stamp on it and go out to the mailbox, or they could click some boxes on a document. They seem to like the DocuSign a lot better. So it's something to put into your thought process before you even start mediating online. Now, meeting security is something that has just become a big, buzzword from the get-go of this entire, online mediation phenomena that started with COVID. The minute hundreds of thousands of people flocked to Zoom, which was set up as a meeting platform, not a dispute resolution secure platform, there were all those issues that hit the press about Zoom bombing and people getting into meetings that weren't supposed to be there. Now, Zoom has always had security measures that you could put in place, but they weren't mandatory. People didn't know about them. People didn't educate themselves on how to use the platform properly, and a lot of problems came about, which has led to Zoom being banned by companies, et cetera. So what Zoom has done, I have to give them credit. They stepped up and immediately have made a number of both improvements, as well as making certain things they're going to automatically happen. Things like requiring a password to enter the meeting, that's now a default on Zoom. You're going to get a password. Using the waiting room, which is by far, I think, the most important security feature, that is also going to be a default on Zoom. The waiting room feature is wonderful because only the mediator, the host of the host of the meeting, has the ability to pull the information from or pull the people from the waiting room and put them into the actual meeting. So it gives the mediator the chance to look in the waiting room, see who's there, make sure there's someone who's supposed to be in the meeting, and then admit them into the meeting. And that's all done from the participants icon on the toolbar that the host will have. You won't have that on your toolbar right now because you're in a webinar. But when you are the host of the meeting, you'll have a manage participants icon, and you can admit people, and you can also eject them. I've never had to do it. I've been doing mediations for 5 years, but you can boot somebody out of your mediation if it turns out they're not supposed to be there. You can also lock the meeting after everyone has entered, meaning no one else can enter. I know people get very excited about that. Honestly, if you're using the waiting room, they can't get in anyway, unless you admit them. So locking the meeting, I don't know, does that much more. But if you're not using the waiting room, you absolutely would want to lock the meeting, because if someone signed on directly into the meeting by not going into a waiting room, they would just suddenly appear in your meeting. So I always, always, always use the waiting room. And then you may want to, as I mentioned earlier, consider using that virtual background or a nondescript background for safety reasons, as I mentioned, for domestic violence cases, high conflict cases, or I actually, as a mediator, have had cases where there were some threats or some, untoward communications from one of the parties, and I did not want my location to be known by that party. So there may be safety reasons for us as well, why we don't want people to know where we are. So let's talk about privacy and confidentiality, because I know these are the biggest concerns, and rightly so, for mediators. Now, as I said, in person, these are concerns as well. I mean, it's a bit of an illusion that we have control. If somebody out there wants to circumvent, especially in the area of privacy, they're likely going to be able to figure out how to do it. What we can do is create the rules, create the ground rules, educate them, make them a part of being, if you're going to participate in this online process, you agree you are not going to do these things. And by the way, here's why you don't want to do those things. But let's talk about confidentiality first, because this is actually very lately becoming a big issue because of this second issue. But in general, confidentiality is a legal issue. Many clients don't even understand the difference between confidentiality and privacy, right? So confidentiality, for the most part, is that evidentiary exclusion under your jurisdiction's laws and codes. It's also often created by contract in our agreement to mediate. Presuming everybody is in the same state or jurisdiction, there's every reason to believe that is all still in full force and effect, and will be relied upon in any later court proceedings. It's been brought out in a couple of recent articles, and I've cited one of them here, and I'll put a link to this article in the chat box at the end. But, or you can just Google this. It's by Jeff Kitchaven, one of my colleagues at the Southern California Mediation Association, and Professor Frisbee, and one of their law students. And it just came out, What You Say in Mediation May Be Discoverable. So they did some research, found some cases, one out of New York and another one, I think, out of Wyoming, where participants in an online proceeding were in different jurisdictions, different states, and in a subsequent proceeding in New York, and I think in another subsequent proceeding in Wyoming, the courts, even though there were contractual clauses about confidentiality in the state where the original action had been filed, they did allow mediation communications to be admitted in New York and in Wyoming. So that is something to be aware of. I don't know that there's an easy answer to how to avoid that. I think it will fall to all the professionals and certainly the counsel involved to know the laws in whatever jurisdiction the participants are in. So that becomes an issue if you are doing a multi-jurisdiction or a mediation where people are in multiple jurisdictions. It may become necessary to let everyone know where everyone is participating from, so that that question can be researched ahead of time. But if everyone's in the same state, I don't think believe there's no question that state's laws and anything that's in your agreement to mediate would control. Whoops, sorry. Privacy is the one where I think we really start to have vulnerability. And that comes to that fact that when your participants are online, they are completely out of your control. All you can see is that face on the screen and their shoulders up. They could have someone sitting on the other side of the computer screen or out of range of the camera, or have their phone set up to, you can't see here, have their phone set up on a tripod over to the side recording the proceeding. There's no way to know that. And that is the vulnerability, because they're remote. Now, again, I think they could be doing all those things in person as well. But what we need to do, this is where we really need to drill down on having rules. We have to have it very clear that third parties cannot be present during the mediation process. And right now, that has been an issue in a large number of mediations that I've taken place in, because people are all in their home with their entire family, who's also working from home, who's also, the kids are home from school, everybody's home. And they think, I've heard this a number of times, oh, that's just my wife, or that's just my nanny, or that's just, it's just somebody. They're not listening. It doesn't matter. It does. They can't be in a place where you have a private proceeding where you have unintended or unagreed upon non-consensual parties present. It has to go actually beyond their being physically present. They can't be within range of hearing. So you can't have eavesdroppers. You can't be sitting in one room. Bonnie and I were talking before this, and I was saying I had to go 2 floors down to do this webinar because my husband is working 2 floors up, and he's really loud on the phone. But if he were a mediator doing a mediation, and I could overhear what was happening in that mediation, then he would have to go somewhere more private for the protection of his process. And the participants have to do that as well and need to know that. I have one mediator I trained. She has set up her mediation, online mediation station, she calls it, in her walk-in closet. And she uses, it's great actually for the audio because it's a nice like cushioned room and there's no echo. And she goes in there and shuts the door, and she has a little table set up, and she uses a virtual background so you don't see the clothes and everything hanging there. But that's what she's had to do to get a private spot. You also need to make sure, and people forget this one, you need to make sure that everyone is on a secure Wi-Fi connection. I've had people go to Starbucks to do their divorce mediation, where I have like turned it on, they pop into the meeting, and I can see the 15 people walking behind them and hear the chatter in the background, and they're ready to go talking about, their kids and their stuff in a public space. They can't do it in a public space. That goes to the third party and the eavesdroppers, but they can't be on public Wi-Fi. That is not a secure Wi-Fi. They need to be on secure Wi-Fi. And then the one that everyone gets worked up over, recording. So this is also, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, people could record in person. That certainly has been done, and it's very easy to do with the cell phone. But I think because everybody knows that recording is a possibility in an online proceeding, because Zoom allows online mediation, that becomes more of an issue. So you have to tell people, I'm not recording and I don't allow recording. And in fact, Zoom has settings in the meeting settings where you can go and check off the boxes where participants cannot record. But I put all of this into a written document and make sure everybody signs it, knowing that that's all a requirement. Now, some additional tips that I put into my ground rules, so I want to make you aware of them, is I tell them to have an interruption-free zone. I make sure that they let their family know, or whoever's around them, that they're going to be busy for the next few hours. I'm not making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for everyone for lunchtime. They need to make alternate arrangements. They need to go on a tech hiatus beyond the tech that they need to be using to be doing the mediation. You find people reading their text messages. I can hear them clicking away, answering emails sometimes because they're already on their computer. So I ask them, as if they're actively participating. Clearly, if they're in a caucus and they're off in their breakout room and I'm in the other breakout room, one of the benefits is that they can multitask and do something else. But if we're actively engaged, please don't be, checking your social media, sending text messages, or doing that sort of thing. I always ask people to sign on early. If it's a 2-person, most of my mediations are with pro se parties, so it's usually a 5-minute early thing where I can check their technology, make sure they're properly signed on. If anyone's having trouble, 5 minutes is usually enough to figure it out. For a multi-party mediation, I'll usually do it in 15 minutes. And if there are a lot of parties, I might even stagger it and start someone, like plaintiff and counsel at 20 of, first defendant and their counsel at quarter of, and I might break that down because it gives you the ability to let them in groups from the waiting room into the main meeting, Give them a gracious hello, welcome. You can have your chat with counsel if you know them. You can meet the party, and that's very, people really enjoy, you know, having that moment that still feels normal to them as if it were in person. You can also, again, deal with all of the tech issues. And then you also want to let people know about respectful and effective online communication. It's just different communicating online. I let people know how important their facial expressions are, and seeing that. I let them know that the inflection and tone is important. Explaining that to people ahead of time helps them to understand how communication might be different. It also might be amplified online, right? Because we're so focused on the face. And the other thing is, you might have noticed I'm a hand talker. Many people are. If you're a hand talker, if you talk down here with your hands, all you look like is you have a shake. If your hair moves, but nothing else does. I've had to learn, and I don't even think about it anymore. If I'm counting with my hand, or if I'm using my hands to talk about breakout rooms, which for some reason I do like that, I just, you know, to do that up there. But I tell people, because I see this all the time, where people are doing that, and you're missing those signals that they're giving you. So give them that little tip ahead of time. Always have a simple protocol in place when tech fails. And I say it that way because sooner or later, tech is going to fail. It's going to happen to you. I did a webinar for the ABA on Tuesday. My Wi-Fi went out twice during the middle of that. So you need to, it's going to happen in your mediations. So you need to have something in place. I adhere to KISS, K-I-S-S, is keep it super simple. Make it something, I tell them, try to log back on. And if you can't log back on, call me on my cell phone. And I make sure that they have my cell phone. I actually put my cell phone number in the chat box when I start any mediation, saying, remember, if anyone has any trouble, text me or call me on my cell phone. The other thing is, for all of us as the grown-ups in the room, the professionals, stay calm yourself when it happens, because it will happen. And if you panic, it's like when your 2-year-old falls down, and if you go running up and you're in a panic and, oh my God, are you hurt? Is it terrible? It's going to be terrible. But if you say, oh, we'll clean that off, you're going to be fine, we've got this handled, your 2-year-old's going to handle it, right? So same thing with clients. I'm not implying they're children, but we need to stay calm. And our first instinct is, when something goes wrong, to get worked up. It doesn't help in this instance with anything that's going to happen in an online mediation. So the number one thing I tell people to do, and I do this myself, and it's the thing that's made my online practice manageable, is you need to create a document that educates and informs the clients. You have to put all of this in writing. I call it my online guidelines and ground rules. I attach it to my agreement to mediate. I have them sign it. And all of the contents of that are basically what we've just been going over. You're going to want, and I believe you have my handout that has all of the elements that I think you should consider covering as a best practice to put into your guidelines and your ground rules for your practice. So just a couple of quick tips about Zoom, and then we'll get to questions. And I'm sorry, I'm running a little bit over, so I'll go through these quickly. But they are, when you're setting your meeting up, make sure that you do set into place things like having the waiting room working. It's something that you have to check off and make. Well, actually, it's going to be by default, it's going to be in place. If for some reason that box is not checked, you do want to make sure it's checked. And always use the waiting room for mediation. You may not want to use it for some of your meetings. You may want your friends and colleagues to be able to log on before you get there. You definitely do not want to do that for your mediation. You want to be, from the very beginning, in charge of your process. That means using the waiting room. You also, one of my favorite parts about online mediation, and one of the things that I think is actually far superior to in-person mediation, is the ability to screen share. The screen share function, especially in Zoom, but also CREC, ODR, Modrin, and Legaler or DRO, those all have wonderful screen shares as well. The function, it allows you to share documents. So imagine if you do come to an agreement and somebody pulls up a template for an agreement, and you start working on that with the 2 attorneys or the 4 attorneys or the clients, and you're typing the words in and they can see it and you can make the modifications. The power of that and the ease of that makes everything so much easier than trying to lean across a conference table saying, no, 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 the paragraph below that one, down near the bottom. You also it has a whiteboard that's very easy to use. People are visual. People assimilate what they see visually much more easily than if you are if I say 100,000 minus 24,692, if I'm writing that equation out, it's actually easier for people to comprehend it and come up with it than if I just say the numbers out loud. They will assimilate it. They're able to make decisions faster. So again, I know you're not all family mediators, but I can just give you anecdotally from my mediation practice. In-person mediations were like 5, 6, 7 sessions, 2-hour sessions. My online mediations are generally 3 to 4. That varies obviously with every case, but definitely I have less online sessions than I had in-person sessions. Now the caucus and breakout rooms, caucusing is, I don't caucus that much in a family mediation, but the ability to be able to do that is critical, I know, for most mediators. And the reason why Zoom is what we've all turned to is because it has the breakout room capability. So breakout rooms and that function of Zoom, although many of the others are adding it, is what makes Zoom so good for online mediation. You need to practice. I will tell you, I have on my website, on that learnedmediateonline.com website, there's a heading up in the menus that says free videos. There are 3 videos there that I highly recommend you watch. One is how to create and put people in breakout rooms. It's the most popular one on the website because it is such a critical component. And because of our short time here, I don't have the ability to, do that for you, but it's a free webinar, just free video. It's like 11, 12 minutes. There's one on how to connect your iPad and how to use the whiteboard as you go between breakout rooms. That's a good one. And then there's one that goes over the toolbar. So just know the breakout rooms are something that you yourself as the mediator need to put some time into practicing before you jump into a mediation. Excuse me. You don't want to be practicing on your participants in your first mediation. I've seen it. I was just an attorney acting as counsel in a mediation the other day, and the mediator had never used breakout rooms before. And I finally created a long story, but I pulled him into a breakout room and explained how to do it to him because I couldn't watch it. I felt badly. But don't do that to yourselves. Practice ahead of time. And then I just like to give a few quick tips for marketing your new online practice, because this is where many of us fall down. It's great that you're offering your services online, but if people don't know that you're doing it, you're not going to, just with any business, you need the clients to come to you. And right now, since mediation or online dispute resolution for many is the only game in town, they are looking for online dispute resolution professionals. So get it on your website. It should be right on your landing page, offering online dispute resolution services, mediation, arbitration, whatever your specialties are. Send out an e-blast to your list, especially if you are a mediator, arbitrator who works with the same attorneys over and over again. Let them know. Make sure it's an important, it's an important thing, and they're looking for that skill. Let them know you've gotten some training. Let them know you've done mediations that way. Put it out on social media. I know a lot of us don't like social media, but it's an integral part of an online marketing campaign these days. And really quick and easy tip: put a line in your email signature. Put it in there, now offering online mediation services, just a quick little line. And you can even make that a hyperlink to your website, or, something quick and easy. But you think about how many emails you send out every day. If that's right down there, it's a quick and easy way to let people know that you're going online. So I do have some programs, and I created a discount code for you all. So I just wanted to make sure I get this to you. It's KBA 10, and you'll get 10% off any of my downloadable programs. So this was sort of a high level of my online mediation. I go into a great deal more detail in the Learn to Mediate online training program. There's also a couple other programs if anyone's interested, but I wanted to get that information to you. And then questions and answers, my favorite part. So if there are some questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yes, there are some questions. And the first question was, William Maines explained that he cut off twice while going from one break room to another from Zoom. Apparently was not an internet issue, but was a Zoom issue. And turn it off and turn it back on again and let everybody else in. Do you have any tips for that?
So, you know, I have not personally ever had that happen. As the host, you could not get back into the mediation. All I can think was that it was locked when you left. And if you had locked the mediation, but that's the sort of thing, I mean, it sounds to me, I will say, like you kept your cool and you did what you need to do. This is why I make sure everybody has the cell phone and the text, because you have that ability to quickly communicate. I'm not sure why you would have gotten cut off. Unfortunately, what I am not is a Zoom technology expert. When it comes to things that go wrong with Zoom, I, like everyone else, have to try and get one of their tech people on the phone. I will tell you, that's one of the reasons why I like Modron and Legaler better, because it's much easier to get someone on the phone for those companies. So unfortunately, I don't know why that would happen. I've never had it happen, but it sounds like, and I give you great kudos for calmly and quickly shutting down and just getting back on. That is the type of thing that's going to happen when you're online. One of my participants said that she starts every mediation with a comment in her opening dialogue to everyone, that, you know, this is newer for me. I know it may be new for you, so let's all try to be kind to each other over, you know, anything that might happen. And she said it's actually been incredibly helpful because it sets a very nice tone for everyone. And she thinks it's actually changed sort of a dynamic. So I've actually started doing that as well, even though it's not that new to me.
And Linda George had a question about government mediations where the computers are furnished with no camera, and some parties have to call in or share, and then some of the employees are in one room and share, some with masks, and they have to wear a mask during the mediation so you can't hear see your face. And it was successful, but any hints on making that easier?
So the first thing I usually do is have everybody who doesn't have a camera use their phone and use the app, the Zoom app, because their phones have a camera. Hopefully, most people have smartphones these days. So you can have them zoom in from the camera, and you can that way have an individual picture for each person. I think I've heard the same comment about the masks and in-person mediations. I was just talking to a colleague at the ABA, and she just did I think there were 12 parties or 12 participants in a mediation, and they had to wear masks for 8 hours. And she said what made the mediation so difficult was she really couldn't read anyone's face. So I think that is probably a huge detriment. And what I would try to do is get everybody off of the same machine and onto their phones. The phone function actually works quite well for everyone except the mediator. It does not, if you are using breakout rooms, you cannot be using the app. The app does not have breakout room capability. So you cannot be the mediator and do breakout rooms on your tablet or on your phone. But for your participants, they can participate from those devices. So that's what I would normally do. Now, if they have more lead time, they can get a USB plug-in camera, which is actually what I'm using. I would show it to you, but then the camera will just move around the room because that's how you're seeing. Actually, I can show it to you because I can switch to the other camera on the one. So I just switched to the camera on my computer. And so this is my little HD camera. So you can buy these at Best Buy, through Amazon. They're like $50, and they're USB plugins, so they can just plug into the computer. So if they have that time and capability, that's another great way to do it. And in fact, I like the quality of, I do a lot of like video recording and stuff like that. So I like the quality and the clarity of the picture. I just switched back to the HD one.
Several people have asked about the availability of recording and the availability of having the PowerPoints so they could print off or copy them on their machine. We talked about trying to get the recording to be posted on the KBA website. What about the PowerPoints?
I think I sent that to you previously, but if I did not, I will download it and forward it to you, Bonnie, so that you can have that. Absolutely.
I did have them for, I had to provide them to get our CLEs, but I don't know that they're on the our website. If
Okay.
is that all right to do that?
You know what? I would say let me send you this one because I just updated it this morning with some additional information. So like the Jeff Kitchaven article, if anyone wants to read that, that information is in this version, and the discount code, if anyone wants it, is in here. So I'll download this right after and send it to you.
Oh, great. And then I was thinking maybe after the meeting, we can provide that information with links to the rest of the ADR section who was not able to attend today.
Yeah, I'd love to get the information out there for everyone.
You are most kind. And we do have another question if there's time, which I think there is. If you leave a breakout room so you can speak privately, what's the best way to let them know you're ready to come back in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is an issue that comes up all the time. And for me, it's one of the things I find rather clunky on Zoom in the breakout room. So there is no way for you to have a chat function between any other room, meaning the main room or any other breakout room, and a breakout room. So there are two things that can be done to communicate. One, they can hit the button on their toolbar. So all the participants in a breakout room have a toolbar in that breakout room. And one of the icons is ask the host for help. So they can click that and you can let them know when you're ready for me to come back. Hit that icon. It will let me know that you're ready for me to come back in. That's not my favorite, but it's workable. That's another reason why I always have my cell phone and I have everybody's text messages. So I use text messaging to chat with people in breakout rooms, and I make arrangements with, usually if it's counsel, I will let counsel know that I'm going to text them, because what it also does not have on breakout rooms is a doorbell or a way to knock on the door so that you don't just barge into that private conference room or breakout room. Zoom has not incorporated that yet. I will tell you, Modron has it and Legaler have it, where before you're going into a private caucus room, you can literally knock on the door or ask them if they're ready for you. So what I do is send a text and say, I've finished with, Attorney Brown and Ms. Green. Are you ready for me to come back in? And if they say no, I say, please just send me a text when you're ready. So I use the cell phone for that.
Very good. That's almost old-fashioned, isn't it?
Yes, so it feels like it.
This is a very important question because it's from Janet Jernigan, who was my mediation trainer. And she asked, do you have experience with co-mediation online? And that is a model that's used at Just Solutions, one of the pioneering mediation providers in the Louisville area.
Well, I love this question because yes, I do have experience with co-mediation and online mediation. It's my favorite thing. I have a very dear colleague that is in California still, and I co-mediate with him still since I left 2 years ago. I do all of my California mediations with him in a co-mediation model, and it's lovely. I will say the one thing that I have found to be disruptive of the mediation process is when you have one or both of the, I'm doing family mediation. So in my case, if both the parties are with him in California in the conference room, and I'm the great and powerful Oz on the wall, the floating head, that is actually not a very productive paradigm. What happens naturally as human beings is they turn to him throughout the process, and it's just a much harder dynamic to get that lovely flow that you can get between two mediators, and I feel like the clients don't get the best of that. So we've moved to, even if the clients are local Californians to him in San Diego, we have moved to doing it, well, before COVID, we had moved to doing it fully online, where the participants stayed home or were separate, and both my co-mediator and I were separate. But it's a lovely model. And in that fashion, again, it works quite well. You can even do, when you're doing the breakout rooms and have one or both of the mediators go back and forth. It's been wonderful. I really enjoy it.
Okay. Well, I think we're about at our stopping point. If there's no further questions, and if Susan doesn't have anything else to add, and I cannot thank you enough. We have lots of chat comments about how wonderful your presentation was, and how much we all want to thank you for joining us today.
Well, I hope it's been helpful to you all. This is my contact information. I urge you all, if you have more questions, if things come up, please consider me a resource. I truly am very passionate about helping us all to have a successful transition to an online practice, to add this as something that really enhances your mediation practice. I've been doing this for a long time, so I truly am happy to share if I can be helpful in any way. So please feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for all who attended.
Thank you, everyone.